Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Welcome, Pacesetters of Agribusiness, to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod. I'm your host, Joe Mosier. Thanks for tuning in today. Before we get to today's episode, as always, a quick reminder. If you haven't done so already, now is a great time to subscribe to the podcast and ensure that you never miss any of the content or conversations that we publish each week to help you deliver better results in your agribusiness through better strategy execution. Now, today we have a bit of a different conversation for you. I recently sat down with two experts in ag tech, Rhishi Pethe of Metal Dog Labs and Patrick Honcoop of agtech Pro. You might know Rhishi through either his newsletter, Software is Feeding the World, or as an occasional host over at Tim Hamrich's top quartile ag podcast, The Future of Agriculture. And if you don't know him, you need to follow this guy. Rhishi refers to himself as a rational techno-optimist. And through his work at Metal Dog Labs, which is his advisory firm, he provides strategic analysis, insights, and guidance to ag tech firms related to a wide variety of things, including AI, software, hardware, autonomy, material science, biotechnology, management practices, and just wider technological developments. Rishi's been working in and around food and ag tech for many years. He's had experiences at HarvestMark, which was later acquired, of course, by Trimble Navigation, and at the Climate Corporation. So I'm really excited to have him on the program. With him also is Patrick, and Patrick also does a considerable amount of writing and content creation, which he largely posts on LinkedIn. So make sure that you check the show notes out and follow him. And that content is related to his work supporting startups and scale-ups that are driving ag tech innovations that shape the future of our food systems. Patrick's consulting firm, agtech Pro, is really focused on supporting companies in their international expansion efforts, partnership building, digital strategy development, product commercialization, and agri-food market intelligence. I've known both of these gentlemen for quite a while, and we've talked about having them on the show before, and it was really a confluence of factors that ultimately told me that now was the right time to have them join me on the pod. The two main drivers, though, as you'll hear in the interview, are my desire to have a broad and informed conversation on artificial intelligence in its many different forms and its impact on agribusiness. And then specifically to build on that to say, okay, what are the experts that really focus in this space? What are they seeing? What are they hearing? What are they thinking about AI in agribusiness? And both Rhishi and Patrick are also part of an interesting new endeavor called the agtech Advisory Collective. And the agtech Advisory Collective really seeks to pool the skills and experiences of many independent advisors to one space in the community as a means for ensuring that startups and scale-ups and ag tech firms get the support and the guidance that they need across a wide spectrum of practice areas, frankly, wider than any one person or one boutique shop could ever provide. I think the collective is interesting, not just because of their specific work, but also what this type of model signals and shows us about the benefits of taking a more expansive definition of partnership as you think about executing strategy in agribusiness. So these guys have a lot of ideas. They are rich in insights to share. I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. And with that, let's jump over to my conversation with Patrick Honcoop and Rhishi Pethe. Patrick and Rhishi, it's really good to see you today. Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod.
Thank you for having us, Joe.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
It's never an easy task to get three people who travel as much as the three of us do. And today the stars have aligned. So here we are. Patrick and Rhishi, we've all been in touch, obviously, for quite some time. Rhishi, you and I have even had the chance to share the stage at some industry events and talk about a variety of factors affecting agribusiness. But one of the other interesting things that you guys are doing beyond your individual businesses and practices, which I think we should give you a chance to talk about, is part of an organization called The Collective. And I want to set the stage here. One of the really interesting phenomena in business that we see proliferating, and this includes ag and agribusiness and ag tech, is a more expansive definition of partnership for businesses and business leaders. And that expansive definition is really coupled with a more accommodative approach, I would say, to collaboration and working with folks outside the four walls of the organization. There's some obvious examples of this in business, things like third-party cloud-based software, where folks have now moved away from proprietary solutions and off-prem hosting and said, okay, look, we're going to hire some of the best cutting-edge solutions in the marketplace to help drive our business, all the way to ag co-ops that used to either consolidate or maybe have a joint venture. And now they form this kind of this third option of a strategic alliance, where maybe they form a targeted, tightly scoped alliance around a specific line of business or a specific set of business services. So there's this trend underway to kind of rethink how you work together with folks in the industry. And I think it's maybe underrepresented in the professional advisory space. And so with that preamble, I'd invite you guys to maybe tell us a bit about the collective, what it is, who it serves, and how your businesses and the work that you guys do fits into this collective in service of agribusiness. So maybe Rhishi, I'll let you start.
Yeah, Joe, thanks for having us. I think as we spend more time in the industry, you realize that there are a lot of challenging problems that different organizations want to solve, whether you're a startup, a big agribusiness, or an investor. And there are very few, there's no one person who can address all of those problems. Even if you take one project, it has elements of strategy, marketing, analysis. It has elements of understanding business in a particular geography, for example. And there's not one single person who can understand all of these nuances to provide a solution to that particular organization. And so the collective was born out of this realization that, there are different members of the collective who each of them are very good at what they do. But when a particular organization has an issue, you can solve a section of that problem. And if I have that organization, it becomes very difficult to understand, how do I get this problem solved if I only engage with Patrick or only engage with me? And so you need a basket of skill sets to solve certain problems. And so then how do you provide that basket of skill sets? So that is where companies like, your big four consulting houses, they come and play, or there are some mid-tier consulting houses or advisory services which are focused on particular industries. And what we have found is that these approaches have limitations. So if you go to one of these big four consulting houses, a lot of times they don't have the operational expertise of having worked in an agribusiness or a startup. They're very good with PowerPoint presentations, and they'll charge you a lot of money. If that's what you want to do, go right ahead and consult with them. You'll get beautiful presentations. But what you're looking for is advice and expertise from people who have worked in the industry. Then the collective is a great place for you to come, because if you look at the profiles of all the different members of the collective, all of us have worked in these spaces. We have made mistakes. We have learned from them. And hopefully we can bring that to the table as a team and make it easier for you as an organization to solve a set of problems that you have by going to one place versus having to manage working with 6 different consultants. So our unique proposition is we have operational experience. We understand the industry problems. We don't charge you $1 million, though we would like to. And maybe our presentations are maybe not as great as, a McKinsey or a BCG. But if that's what you're going for, go work with them. If you are really trying to solve problems and expand your business and solve problems, look for something like the collective.
So thank you for that, Rhishi. I think what's also really important is, within the agricultural industry, it's a relatively small world. And if you work with these smaller organizations, the non-ABCDs, the non-Bayers or Pethes, et cetera, it gets even smaller. And these companies have, significant, but still somewhat modest in contrast balance sheets. And so who they can engage with, the imputed price per slide, capacity to pay, to use your example of the beautiful PowerPoint slides from major consulting firms, is somewhat limited, and it's highly relational, right? And so I think one of the things that I've seen in my business is one of the value propositions is folks, when they may end up getting support from a variety of individuals that I'll bring in to support on a given engagement that have a specific skill set, access to information, a certain set of experiences that either I don't have, or they frankly are more passionate about providing them, I can bring them in to the benefit of the client. But the client is working with me. And so I think that also helps, this kind of collective approach allows them to preserve their relationship with Rhishi, with Patrick, with Joe, with whoever that trusted advisors that they engage with, but still having a broader set of skills to pull on. Patrick, can you maybe talk about generally in the scope of the collective as it is today, what are some of the examples of skill sets and experiences and service offerings that are represented within that group?
Yeah, Joe. So it's pretty broad. And let me start by saying that all of us are independent. So we're all working as independent consultants, which I think is also important, as it means that we are not biased, right? We're not tied to one organization. So that also provides the ability to provide that independent and neutral perspective to the client, which I think is important for many. The other aspect is we have a global representation. So at the moment, we are with 6 individuals, 6 consultants, and then we have 3 partners that we also closely cooperate with. And we have representation in North America, South America, Europe, and Australia. So it also provides us the ability to really give a global perspective on what's going on in agtech, and also what works in one region and what can work potentially also in another region. So what can you learn from each other? And for agtech companies, especially startups, scale-ups, if they want to build a viable business, it often means going international. And going international is really, really difficult, especially because every market is different, right? Farming is different, practices are different, the ecosystem is different. So that the global market access is also one of our core focuses, that we can help companies to go from one region to another region. So that just as one example of our service offerings. Now, in terms of the skill sets, we have people in there that really have a very practical background, meaning that they can help with already in the product market fit, help a startup with really narrowing down what is the product market fit, doing trials in the field. We have people in the collective that are more focused on commercial and growth. So how do you really grow a business from going from startup to scale up? How do you develop your channel strategy and so on? We have folks that are more technical and can really help with technical due diligence as well as laying out product strategy. And then we also have partners around M&A and also marketing, for example. And just one example. So I've been working with a client now for almost 3 years, and it started by helping them with exploring the market opportunity for that technology in Europe. But then over time, it ended up in helping them really across their company with all sorts of services. And initially it was me, then they needed some support with strategic marketing. So I looked in Dan Schultz, who is also part of the collective. At some point, they also needed some perspective on product strategy. So I connected them to Rhishi. Then later on, they were exploring also if they were getting ready for a potential exit. So I connected them to further partner, which is also a partner of the collective. So it really shows that we can really help a company along their journey at the different stages with different skill sets that we can bring to the table.
And how long ago did this all come together? And I don't want to say formalized because that implies structure. And as you said, this is more of a trusted, intentional network, but not a corporate governance structure. But when did you all sort of decide that, hey, there's something here that we need to talk about and market around as this basket of skill sets, as Rhishi put it, and kind of bring that to market, if you will, even if it is a informal but intentional network of advisors?
That's a good question, that Joe. So we started with the initial idea, I would say already 2 or 3 years ago. I was talking about this early on with Alan Fetters, who's part of the collective. I bounced the idea also with Shane Thomas at some point to get some feedback. And it took us a while to also find the right set of people to kick this off. We initially had some one-on-one relationships working together on projects. And then early last year, so early 24, we felt we had the right group to really pull this off. And then, of course, we also needed to figure out like how formal and how loosely we want to structure it. So we officially launched it then in November last year. And the feedback has been great. The industry really sees this as a value of having this group of independent consultants, but then also working as a group, as a pool all together.
Very good. Very good. Well, we will, I'm sure we'll come back and float in and out of discussions around the collective and perspectives of folks in it. But I'll also make sure that ultimately in the show notes here, we do have some links to where our listeners can find more information about it. Last question specific to the collective, and I want to just make sure this is front and center. It really is focused around supporting ag tech companies more so than legacy agribusiness. Is that correct?
That is correct. So especially the agtech startups and scale-ups that are developing really cool, innovative solutions. However, we do also get more requests and opportunities we see with working with agribusiness organizations, especially around innovation strategy.
Okay, very good. Very good. Well, let's talk about now, maybe get your perspectives on some trends and some challenges and opportunities actually facing both ag tech as well as legacy brick and mortar agribusiness operators, your grain originators, your ag retailers, your crop input manufacturers and distributors, et cetera. AI or artificial intelligence has been, headline news in terms of, innovation, as you put it, Patrick, since late 2023. And that already feels like quite a lifetime ago, honestly. It's hard to remember what we were talking about before we talked about ChatGPT all the time. But I would say outside of those that are technically very close to artificial intelligence, or those that have deploying it against some obvious use cases, outside of the techno optimists that are fervent about this, I think we might be getting to the point where people are not entirely sure how it could help. Yes, they've heard that it can help them and that it should help them and they should be using it, but they're not entirely sure how it could help, maybe not fully appreciating how it could fundamentally take apart their agribusiness, and frankly, maybe failing to appreciate really the entirety of what AI is, right? Bigger than an LLM or ChatGPT or Gemini or Llama or whatever interface you're using. So I would really appreciate if we could maybe spend a couple of minutes, Rhishi, if you could walk us through, getting back to the basics, what is the different modes of delivery of AI, not just specific to agribusiness, but that we see everywhere, because it's not just LLMs. What are the modes of delivery? What are the forms that it takes? And then maybe we can kind of tee that up for a conversation around what are we actually seeing in terms of getting traction or delivering value within agribusiness and ag tech related to AI.
Yeah, and as you rightly said, Joe, the consumer excitement for AI definitely has come because of ChatGPT. There was a moment, late 2022, early 2023, when your grandma is asking you about ChatGPT, right? I mean, that's reality. That didn't happen before that. Having said that, AI has been around for a long time, more than 4 or 5 decades. And at a very basic level, what AI is it helps you do pattern recognition. And, you have a whole bunch of different data that is coming at you. And, human beings are fairly good at recognizing patterns in our day-to-day life. We recognize patterns of behavior. We recognize patterns of certain aspects of business. But as things have become more complicated and we have access to more data, just so much more data is out there, it becomes very difficult for human beings to recognize those patterns. And that's where AI plays a huge role. So take a very simple example, satellite imagery has been around for 50, 60 years, right? Really right after World War II, people have been launching satellites and we have data from satellites. And that's a huge amount of data. And that satellite data can help you identify patterns in crop growth, issues with, maybe there's a disease outbreak somewhere. Just by looking at the vegetation of what's happening and then comparing that with sort of how a healthy crop grows, those are all patterns. You can match them together and say, okay, maybe this part of the field is not showing the type of growth that you expect based on every other pattern that we have seen, right? Or you can say that this is the pattern for a cornfield, and now anywhere I see this pattern, I know that's a cornfield, right? These are very simple examples of using AI, and that has been around for quite some time. I think the other piece where AI can really help, again, is looking at a lot of data. So, for example, when you think about traditional ways in which how crop protection products are created, right? You start with a large number of sample molecules for a crop protection product, let's say an herbicide, and then you understand what are their characteristics for applying to different scenarios. And then over a long period of time, you can start narrowing those down by looking at efficacy and safety and regulatory requirements. And then you ultimately end up with a few candidate molecules that you can take to production. Now, that whole process is very data driven, and it requires understanding different patterns of how that particular molecule behaves in certain scenarios. And that's where you could use AI, right? So first example was identifying problems. Second was using product discovery or product identification. And then more recent ones are more like ChatGPT, right? Like I have a whole bunch of data and manuals and unstructured data. Can I use an LLM to query what's happening, which is very difficult for a human being to look across 20 sets of documents and come up with the right answer, right? So these are just sort of 3 different flavors, something which is really old, which has been around for 40, 50 years, something really, really very new, and then what we are seeing right now. All of these are examples of AI.
And maybe this is derived from the example of satellite imagery, but I think about the nearly infinite amount of data that's been collected, visual data collected by Tesla through all their vehicles on the road, right? Which is taking real world visualized, captured visualized scenarios, discerning from them certain, again, pattern recognition, as you said, and helping to iterate upon that to improve the reaction time, the reaction choices, the design parameters, reward functions of their vehicles around what they do in those given scenarios. So there's also this visual aspect, I think. Would something like that also qualify as AI because it's taking a different type of data input and recognizing patterns in service of an outcome?
Absolutely. I mean, all the automation, and Patrick should talk about that. I mean, there's just so much more automation that is happening at the equipment level. And, we're talking about autonomy, for example. It has to understand in real time what's happening in the field. Is there an obstruction? Is there a weed that I'm seeing? Should I activate my spraying mechanism to hit that weed? And all of that has to happen in real time. Again, identifying a weed versus a crop, that is basically a pattern recognition problem, which involves AI. Identifying a human being versus traffic cone in your Tesla example, that is a pattern recognition problem, right? So these are all pattern recognition problems which are being aided by AI. And we see that very explicitly today in all the ChatGPT type stuff that we talked about. We see a lot of that in the equipment, in the smart equipment that we see today, whether it's automation, whether it's see and spray type of technology, whether it's navigation in a field. All of those use tons of AI to actually provide you a capability that you didn't have before.
One of the things I think is interesting, and so thank you for qualifying that. So I'm just going to think out loud for a moment here, but when we think about some of the early examples of where we had automation that may not qualify as artificial intelligence, right? It's just more routine running of an algorithm or of a formula. You take something as simple as an Excel workbook, which, I think if we're being honest, is probably the enterprise backbone of 90% of agribusiness. Is someone's still downloading something into an Excel spreadsheet to look at data and make some kind of a decision and generate a report. But I feel like the adoption, the willingness to adopt and defer to that technology when the macros were right, when the formulas were correct, when the sheets played well together, folks were very quick. They were happy with the efficiency and not as reluctant to give up the task, right? I'll build the sheet. It'll do the work for me. Same thing when we started to see ERP systems be able to pull order information from one module in the system, customer information, location, name, payment terms, etc., delivery instructions, and pull it all together into one invoice or manifest and generate that, right? These were sort of ones and zeros, the system going and pulling information from a database, doing some work very efficiently for you and spitting it out. And I wonder if we're all kind of been sort of had our hair blown back with excitement and amazement, but then also been somewhat stuck in how do we actually adopt these things at scale by the fact that some of these pattern recognition options we're talking about now they're fundamentally different. I mean, we're talking about when you go into ChatGPT and you ask it, I want to schedule a workshop. We're going to do a workshop on strategic planning for the next year. Right. What's the good agenda for a strategic planning workshop? What's the pre-reads? What's the information? What are the roles we have? And it'll literally within, 10 seconds spit out something that is at least a good starting point. That's so radically different because it feels like it's pulling on qualitative inputs, not quantitative inputs. And the same thing with visualization data and autonomy. It feels like it's a bit more of an abstraction because these are not ones and zeros that it's pulling on, at least from our human perspective. And so do you guys see that as is that driving different behaviors around adoption or people's even imagination around what adoption use cases could look like?
Well, I think you're right that we have seen the technology already happening for many years, right? And one thing before answering your question is, I think AI today is also it became really a buzzword, right? And we all talk about AI. But I think it's always important to start really, what is the task? What's the problem at hand? And then figure out what can be a solution. And is AI the right solution for it? Now, I do think that we are now entering a phase where we had very complex problems that with AI as a technology, as an enabler, we can develop the solution for that. And I think that is mainly to do with the vast amounts of data that can be analyzed and assessed, and then an answer is given back, right? And I think that will really enable, at the end, development of better products. What I mean with that, also, Rich just mentioned around smart equipment. I see there big opportunity and already a big uptake and usage of machine learning, which is also AI, where there's so much data available around the scouting, weed detection, and so on. And with these AI technologies and the models, we're now able to come up way quicker with the solution, right? So if you think about see and spray, for example, you want to have a very quick answer because you're spraying, you're detecting the crop, you need to detect the weed, and you drive 50 miles an hour over the field. Now, before, without AI, that wasn't possible. But now with AI and the models, you can realize that you really do quickly assessment. You can detect where's the weed, where to spray, and so on. And then you also have the processing power, the computer behind it to really act on it and spray and execute.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think to build on to what Patrick is saying, right? I mean, there are a couple of differences between, so if there's, you talked about Excel, let's call it traditional software, right? Then you have AI, which is what Patrick is talking about, and then Gen AI, which again, Patrick was talking about, right? So some of the key differences are that in a traditional software, the behavior, assuming all the inputs are the same, is repeatable, right? So you can ask the same question again and again, and it will come back with the same answer, assuming nothing else has changed. I think that is why, to your point, we feel much more comfortable to use Excel or whatever. And the formula, all it is doing is automating a bunch of calculations through macros, maybe some if then else statements, but you know what to expect. With traditional AI, it is a little bit different than your traditional software. What it does is it sort of spots patterns and put things in the right bucket, but then it picks the best answer from the options it has seen before, typically, right? The difference with Gen AI, it is more stochastic in nature. And what that means is you might, to your example of give me an agenda for this meeting that I want to host, I bet if you ask it 5 times, you will get slightly different answers, 5 different times. And so that's why it's called generative AI. And it is that stochastic nature and the creativity it shows based on all the patterns it has learned through all the data that has sucked in. And so it's almost like a storyteller. It becomes a storyteller. And that's what is freakish for us as human beings, right? Because it starts behaving in ways that we might not expect. And I think that is what also creates issues in terms of making sure we trust the answers that it gives us, right? Because it can get creative. And there are a lot of ways to make sure you can trust the answers it gives. People have come up with many different ways in which you can still harness the power of Gen AI while minimizing the impact of or making sure you can trust the responses that it is giving you. So there are differences between traditional software, how it operates, traditional AI, how it operates, and Gen AI, which is stochastic in nature and can get creative. I think that's where some of the adoption challenges come in, even though there is a lot of power behind these tools.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
And I think there's, from a layman's perspective here, I think, to your point around how people get freaked out, there's a certain thing of, I recognize that an Excel workbook with all the proper macros can do this work incredibly fast and give me a predictable outcome. I can also imagine myself doing the work. It's just going to be a heck of a lot faster and probably a higher accuracy rate, well, near 100% if I built it properly, to do it. But when you think about, I'm going to walk 1,000-acre field, and I'm going to accurately identify every emergent weed or pest or issue, and then be able to immediately discern what it is, what the remedy is, what the dosage of that remedy and product application is, the timing of it, how I'm going to follow up. That's an almost unimaginable task for anybody to conceive of. How could I conceivably do that at scale? And then when we have the option of a machine doing it, I think there's also that chasm becomes very big and very deep, because it's so far beyond what we can imagine ourselves being able to do. Now, you guys have the benefit of not just closely following companies in our industry, as part of the analysis and commentary you produce and provide, but you also see inside a lot of organizations via the work that you do. And I'm going to presume that you also see how they're using technology, specifically AI in its many different forms, to deliver against their objectives, both commercial objectives, efficiency objectives, cost, etc. And I don't want you guys, I'm not asking you guys to necessarily give up any competitive secrets or violate any trust, but generally speaking, what are you seeing around some of the maybe AI quick wins in ag tech and agribusinesses? And also, where are maybe some of the more interesting, non-obvious use cases that are starting to materialize? Because we all know about automating call centers and phone trees and things like that. There's probably a whole ocean of more material and dynamic and interesting opportunities beneath it. So what are you guys seeing in your travels?
So I personally work a lot with these agtech companies that are more active in the precision ag space, the equipment, and there I see a lot of development around using computer vision. As we briefly discussed, like if it is around seed space, spot spraying, and it is just fascinating on how accurate these models are becoming, so that they really can detect emergent weeds when they are very, very small at a machine that is operating very fast. So I think that entire computer vision, that's definitely an area where I see a ton of development in all kind of directions. So that's more on the technology side. If I then zoom into agribusinesses, it's interesting, right? There you see different use cases, I would say, which are more related to administration, logistics, operational work, where AI can help. So for example, I see that some equipment dealers are now adopting a solution that can help them with answering questions to the farmer. So a farmer is calling in, there's a machine breakdown or there's an issue with the operation, how can I help? And you have these operator manuals that are very thick, you have service manual that are very thick. Their AI can help by typing in quickly a question, and right away it spits out the answer on how to set a machine, how to do better, how to solve a problem. And technicians is an issue, right? There's a shortage on technicians, there's a shortage of service people. So it definitely make them, so the service people, way more productive. At the same time, it helps the grower to also get quicker back to work. So I think that's an interesting use case of using AI more on the administration side of things, not so much on the technical sides. Now, if I zoom into ag retail, also there, you see some companies are testing out with voice recording. So, for example, you've been scouting a field, the agronomist can record by voice what he has seen, also make a note about the customer to make sure that also there's a record of his visit. And of that is then done at the end of the day today, manually, takes a ton of time, frustration, and now you can do it in his pickup when he's driving to the next customer.
So something where they taking an audio file or some kind of a feed from that agronomist or that sales rep and actually having it populate their CRM or their customer relationship management system within the business.
Yeah.
I can also imagine that other example, sorry, Rhishi, but with the machine breakdown and the customer service tech. So I don't think it's novel to call a help center and ask a question and have the person say, "Yeah, sure, I'd love to help you with that." Just one moment, and they're typing into some kind of an internal FAQ. But imagine the iteration and the speed if they are a human interface to you, or at least you believe them to be, and the machine is listening to the same audio that they are, and the machine is in real time populating a screen for things, not even having them type the question, but saying, based on what this person just said, ask this question. Ask if they've done these 3 things. Make sure we have the serial number. What model is this? All these kinds of the prompting questions where the machine is actually doing it. It makes for maybe a less interesting job, perhaps, but talk about the efficiency gain would be 10x, if not more, if not higher. But Rhishi, sorry, I cut you off there.
No, I would disagree with you on the fact that you're saying it makes for a less interesting job. It actually frees up your time to make your job more interesting by focusing on higher value activities, right? So,
Okay.
for example, as Patrick was saying, and I've seen these manuals and these product use labels, right? It's like a 20-page document with multiple charts and diagrams, and wind speed has to be so much, and you have to be 50 feet away from water, and you have to raise your left hand, and you have to kick the ball with the right. I'm making some of these up, but it's a complicated set of instructions to say, how can I use this product and when can I use this product, right? And the information is there. It's just very difficult to access and apply to the right context. And this is something, Patrick touched on earlier, that ag is very context dependent. What works in this field, the answer might be a little bit different for some other scenario, right? And I think that's where AI is really good at personalization, because it understands those patterns and it says, Joe, this is your operation and this is how you farm and this is what works for you, versus Patrick, you have a slightly different set of conditions. And because of the personalization power, it can really give you an answer which is tailored to you, Joe, versus Patrick, for example, right? And I think what that does is, we published a set of white papers recently where we've actually gone in and looked at the data. And for example, with the initial pilot that Bayer has done, they are able to save about 10% of their time for their field sales representatives, FSRs they are called. Now you as a business have a decision to make. What do I do with that extra 10% of time that I have freed up? You could use that to make more phone calls. As you said, ag is more relationship driven. Strengthen your relationship with your existing customers. Or you can expand it to include more growers that you could not reach because you didn't have time. Or you could say, I'm going to do something higher value add for my customer, right? And there are multiple examples like that. We did a project with a white paper with Digital Green, which is a large nonprofit which works in India. And, they have dropped the cost of servicing their customers by a tenth, by almost like 90%. And another interesting example, you talk about what are interesting use cases. When you think about a new product that gets introduced in the market, right, there is a natural rate of adoption for that product. And yes, a lot of it depends on how good the product is, the product market fit or not, pricing, all of that is there. But there's also an issue of knowledge dissemination, of making your sales staff be comfortable in positioning that product for that customer. And that typically takes time. That's also, slows things down. With something like Gen AI, you could potentially speed that up and change your sort of distribution curve and lift it up a little bit. And even if you lift it up by a few degrees, that could be huge from a financial standpoint. And that could apply for a retailer, for example. They might have a lot of private label products that they want to introduce. And how do you position them to your growers and your other customers? You could use tools like AI to potentially change the shape of the curve. And whatever is the original curve versus the new curve, everything between that is added revenue that you can add and added margin that you can add to your business. So people need to think creatively with these tools. And one thing which we haven't talked about is that with some of these newer tools, the cost of experimentation has gone down significantly. Now you can have an idea, run an experiment for a few $1,000s, versus earlier you would spend a lot of time and a lot of money to run an experiment to say, does something work or not? So I think that is other change that I'm seeing in companies. They are much more willing to run multiple experiments because the cost of experimentation has gone down significantly.
Yeah, we've actually seen that and heard of it anecdotally as well in some of our engagements, Rhishi, where not only is there an increased appetite for experimentation because of the lower cost and the higher speed of learning, but even in the cases where there was not a reliable tool or adoption of the tool wasn't all that compelling relative to the moderate gains they might find in efficiency, accuracy, etc. What's interesting about it is it often caused them to go back and look at their current process around how work was getting done, which we all know we should be doing. But it's usually the last thing we're going to ever get to because there's so many problems that occupy our headspace in the businesses day to day. We never have an opportunity to go and look closely at a process that ostensibly seems to be working. And it's not until you look closer that you realize just how inefficient it actually is. And so I do think that this dramatic reduction in the cost of experimentation is going to just drive broader continuous improvement, even in those cases where AI ultimately is not adopted, at least in the near term, as a remedy.
Yeah, I'll give you one anecdote. That I worked with a company and they're getting a lot of pressure from their board saying, you have to do something with AI, right? That was the mandate. This goes back to Patrick's point, like start with the problem, don't start with the tool. And so we went through an exercise of looking at 20 of their use cases. And in like 16 of them, like they didn't have the data, they didn't have the skill sets, they didn't even have cloud infrastructure. So there was just no way to apply AI. And to your point, Joe, they said, okay, they're not happy with the response that they couldn't use AI because that's what they wanted to go back to the board with. But ultimately, they said, okay, now this is shining a light on some of the deficiencies that we have in their infrastructure, how we collect data, how we store data. And if we really want to harness the power of AI, these are some basic problems that we need to fix. And so that spun out these other projects, which, even if they didn't use AI, that would make them more efficient. So we are seeing this happen in real life.
Absolutely. And to that point, the idea of we need to do something with AI, the moment someone says, we need to do something with AI because our shareholders, our board, whoever it is asking us, it almost feels like at that moment with that statement, they're already set up to fail. Because if you're running around saying, what are we going to use AI? And you're not derived from the problem, which I know we all say this, right? Start with the why, start with the problem, et cetera. But what we've been sort of advising some of our clients to do, and I won't claim to be any sort of an AI expert, but when this inevitably comes up in the boardrooms where we're spending time with the management teams and the board of directors, both in co-ops and privately owned companies, we usually say, guys, don't go running around launching a campaign for how to use AI. Start to instill in the conversations every time there's a big, gnarly problem to be solved, or someone complains about, this process sucks. We're getting to that season now. We got to do X, Y, Z, and it's just painful. I can't wait till it's over. That's a moment to say, okay, interesting. Let's look at that process and think about, is this something where AI could help us? And the nice thing there is it's never confined to a campaign because those problems and that pain expresses itself every day. And so to the extent that folks can do that, they'll be very far ahead. You made an interesting comment though, Rhishi, and I want to kind of shift over to Patrick here. When folks are trying to drive adoption of new technologies, and in this case, artificial intelligence and its variety of modes and delivery mechanisms, it can be a bit happenstance. It can be a shotgun approach. But one of the things that actually seems to drive better outcomes is having an underlying digital strategy. And that digital strategy, of course, needs to be derived from the outcomes you're trying to produce as an overall organization. I look at strategy as an anchoring point, right? For the infinite number of things that we could do to grow the business and spend our time and opportunities we could chase, the strategy is a point of reference. We anchor to it and we say, okay, does this actually help move the organization in the direction that we want to go? Patrick, I know you do a lot of work with digital strategy. And I think listeners, if we stopped right now, listeners would probably walk away saying, oh yeah, digital strategy, we might need one, we might have one, et cetera. But we would have a nearly infinite number of interpretations of what that is. And so maybe you can talk us through, how do you define a digital strategy? What are its components? And how do you operationalize that in the business?
It's a very interesting topic, and in my opinion, really a key topic, as it is the foundation for all what we've been talking about before, right? Without a digital strategy, without high quality data sets, you won't be able to use these tools. Now, I've been interacting with many organizations, and some of them told me, yeah, we are developing an app, so we have a digital strategy. I'm like, developing an app is not a digital strategy. Because at the end, in my point of view, it's almost changing the culture, right? It means going from analog to digital and being able to really digitize your workflows, digitize your record keeping. So it starts by setting up a CRM. It starts by having a CRM that's connected to your ERP, making sure that you have digital records about your customers. So let's say you have your agronomist staff, that they have access to what has been done on the field. Now, then we talk about the field. So it starts with having digitally field information available. So it really comes down by starting with a record, so a digital representation of your customer and the farm, up to then also collecting all the information around what has been done with this customer, field visits, advisory, POs, product sold, and so on. And there it is also about not just having one view on it and one silo, but making sure that different silos are then also connected, so that you can also pull and bring the data out of different silos together in order to really come up with then better advisory, for example.
Yeah, I take your point there. It's even something as simple as digital records, right? If you're an organization that's still running, I'm going to use a grain elevator for a simple example. But if you're going out having folks sign physical contracts and you've got manual scale tickets and you are texting out a picture of a bid sheet that is written on a whiteboard in the office every day, maybe AI can scan your text messages and pull out those bid prices, but you've already hamstrung yourself. There are limits to what AI and new technologies are going to do for the efficiency gains in your organization if the underlying transactions themselves aren't yet digitized. And maybe for many of our listeners, that's obvious and they're already way past that. But I think it's a digital strategy, to your point here, is making sure that all the foundation of the home and the plumbing through which water moves inside of that home are actually set up to support what it is you're trying to achieve. Do you often see, what is the spread of companies that you feel have a robust sort of top quartile digital strategy to those that maybe think they have one, but it's quite ineffective? How would you rate the industry based on what you've seen?
Well, I would say that only 10-20% of the agribusiness that I deal with really have a solid, well-executed digital strategy. And I think especially phases right now where, again, there is this hype of AI, and going back to Rhichi's point that, this client where the board was asking for, hey, what's your AI strategy? Well, it also now shows to these organizations that they have to really go back to the basis and really go back to the digital strategy and rethink it and also come up with a better plan as they had before. And related to that, I think the digital cannot be the objective on itself, right? It always should have this objectives behind it. And then I think it all starts from the customer experience. So how is your customer experiencing the interaction with you, and how can that be digitized by then also making the experience better for the user. Going back to your point, Joe, like the physical scale tickets, like how awesome is it when you have it just digital right away? When you have the delivery, you see it in your portal. These are just small steps, but it definitely also helps in terms of the customer experience, and with this also the satisfaction and hopefully also the loyalty between you and the customer.
Staying rooted in just the, in the real world and with human emotions and how people react when someone's being pressured by their board, by their chief executive, et cetera, to develop an AI strategy, right? Which is basically, can you give me the dashboard on how we're using AI to drive improvements in our business? Is that individual, in your experience, how likely are they to actually say, you know what, we're going to go back to basics and actually build a digital strategy? I am convinced that it's absolutely necessary because having an underlying strategy to execute against is core to the work that we do. And absent a strategy, it's really hard to do M&A well. It's an infinite number of reasons why you may or may not be doing a deal, and ultimately it's hard to defend if it's not tied back to a strategy. But I wonder, in these moments of high change, of high pressure, how likely are folks to actually have the appetite to sit down and do that digital strategy building, despite how important it obviously is? Have you experienced or observed reluctance to do that, or do folks generally recognize it and then lean into the task?
Yeah, I mean, I can comment on that a little bit. I think the problem starts with when you say we have a digital strategy, right? I think I would say, stop. That's not the right way to start this conversation. What you need to think about is you are an agribusiness. You are not a digital business. You are not a technology company. The digital strategy, or the whatever you want to call it, that is to enable you to run your business in a different way, whether it's more efficiently, to Patrick's point, a better customer experience, or create a new workflow or improve an existing workflow so that you can increase your revenue or increase your margins, whatever your business outcomes are. The digital strategy is in service of your overall business strategy and the outcomes you're going for. So if somebody comes to me and says, I want a digital strategy, I first stop them and say, no, that's not the right question to ask. The right question to ask is, what is your business strategy and how are you going to use digital to enable that or supercharge that, right? Or, whatever those outcomes you're looking for. And so once you have that starting point, you have a North Star. We want to increase the revenue by whatever. We want to address this new customer base, or we want to improve the customer experience. And then you say, okay, what are the tools do I have? How do I use digital? How do I use data? Where does AI fit in? What are the skill sets I need within the organization? Who do I partner with? Do I bring in Patrick and his team to help me understand and work through that, right? So I think starting with the right question is super important, because if you don't, then you'll be chasing like, I need an AI strategy or I need a digital strategy. Like, I think you already started 5 steps behind from where you need to start. So people who recognize that technology is an enablement tool for your agribusiness or whatever it is, I think these are the people who start with the right questions, and then they can work through that process. I think that's sort of what I've seen. The difference, people who say, I want an AI strategy or a digital strategy purely without worrying about the business strategy, I think they struggle. People who start the right questions, they have a better chance of getting the outcomes that they're looking for.
That's very well said. And I think that's probably a good place for us to leave it. I certainly want to have you guys back on. I think we could opine on, how to build a digital strategy, for example, starting with those questions. How do you actually look at an existing business strategy, and from that derive the key components that will actually help you focus your technology investments and of energy and capital, et cetera. But I'm convinced that this will be very additive to the listeners, and likely have folks that are going to want to reach out and continue the conversation with you both. So I'll make sure that we have links to your LinkedIn profiles, your own advisory practice, as well as the collective. With all that, I just want to say thank you very much, Rhishi and Patrick, for taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Joe.
Thank you, Joe. It was a fun conversation.
It very much was, and I appreciate the fact that we were able to replicate some of the good dialogue and debates and willingness to disagree that we've had when we haven't been hitting record in the past. So that's fantastic. And then as we close out to our listeners, I just want to thank you for tuning into today's episode. I hope you found something of interest and of actionable value in today's conversation. If you did, I'd ask that you please consider sharing this episode with someone that you think would find similar benefit. It's the very best way that you can support the show, and one of the amazing ways that you can help elevate thinking around strategy execution all across the ag supply chain. I look forward to having you join us again right here on the Pacesetter Pod.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.